Hey students, hope you're doing well. Just want to make a quick video to talk to you about Chapter 1 for Business Law. I know this is an online class, but I do want to try to reach out and give you guys some extra resources. Sometimes hearing it and having somebody talk to you about it kind of crystallizes a little bit better. So that being said, just want to spend a few minutes, no more than 15 minutes, just walking through Chapter 1. Highly encourage you to read the chapter, especially being an online course. My ideal, of course, would be that every student reads every chapter assigned. Um, Being a practical person, I realize that's not always the case, but I do want to encourage you to read because that's where the learning really starts to click in when you can listen to a lecture, read the content, take notes, do assignments. Those multiple exposures really help to crystallize these concepts and ideas into your long-term memory. So all right, so chapter 1 is about American law, legal reasoning, and the legal system. We'll try to zoom in a little bit, make sure you can see this okay. So let me shape this. So the American legal system developed with the goal of establishing standards of what's minimally acceptable behavior. And legal systems throughout history have tried to create this context by which a society operates. If you go all the way back to Hammurabi's Code, this was a system by which people could conduct themselves in public or in society. And so our legal system has a very similar framework. This is what you do, this is how you act in order to make sure that you're staying within our framework for our society. Following law is minimum, also meaning that this is the minimum standard we want you to take. Like, wearing a seatbelt, that's the minimum safe thing we want you to do. You should try to do more than that, but that is kind of our minimum bar that we're setting. Also held to higher standards of ethics and responsibility, meaning that uh, sometimes in business we talk about there are things that are illegal and unethical, but there are some things that are legal and yet still unethical. And then you have the legal and the ethical. So there's all these different blurred lines. And so just because something is legal doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it or that it's ethical. Sometimes the law has to catch up to direction society's going. We just studied a business recently in my management class called Valiant Pharmaceuticals, where they were buying drug companies, raising the prices, double-digit, triple-digit price increases on some of these drugs. And was that illegal? No. Was it unethical? I think if you're a person that is using these drugs to survive, if you have a disease and you need these drugs, yeah, absolutely, you're going to come say it's unethical. So I think if you ask the public, their perception of it being ethical or not, I think a large chunk of the public might say, yeah, there's some ethical issues with that, putting profits over people's health, but yet it's a legal activity, and it's important for us to talk about these things because, as I tell my other students, I'm a capitalist. I believe in the profit motive. I believe that the profit motive leads to innovation, higher quality of life, higher standards of living. But that being said, I'm not a profit at all costs. I'm not in favor of putting profits before doing the right thing, because you've got to be able to live with yourself at the end of the day. You've got to be able to sleep at night knowing that what you're doing is just going to pass that smell check. If it's not something that I feel comfortable doing ethically, that's going to bother me. And so some people it wouldn't bother. That they could do something that might be in an ethical gray area. But for me personally, I think I would have a big problem doing something like that. So what the law does is it promotes consistency, and we're going to talk about some functions of the law. So the legal system is designed to have leverage past judicial reasoning and to promote fairness through consistency, meaning that what happens to me if I do something should also happen to this person. I say this is the ideal. We see like a wide variety of consistency applied in the law. For example, if somebody commits, a murder, sometimes that individual could be found not guilty. Sometimes that individual could get a limited punishment compared to other people that have gotten either a life sentence or the death penalty. And so there is a broad application of how the law is applied. And so this idea of consistency, it's a nice ideal, but I think there's a lot of instances where it falls short. And part of that is because we have so many people that are exposed to the legal system, and we have large numbers of people that are going through the legal system. You're going to find examples of inconsistency. So judges in common law systems help shape law through ruling and interpretations. As a judge, a person might have an interpretation, and they have their own internal biases. But we do have some checks and balances. So if a judge makes an improper interpretation of the law, that can be appealed, and a superior judge, could overrule that lower court judge. So we do have some checks and balances in the system. These past decisions are referred to as case law. Precedent is set. Judges rely on precedent. These are previous court rulings on similar cases for ruling in their own case. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at history and saying, because this case had these similar circumstances, the decision went this way, and I'm going to rule this way in order to have consistency. It's not a perfect system, but it's a theoretically good system because it's what we have, and it's far from perfect. I think if you talk to lawyers, judges, law enforcement, and they were frank about the legal system and the criminal justice system, they will tell you about some of the inconsistencies and issues in the system. But you know what? You're going to find that in every system. If you talk to any professional in any field, they're going to be able to tell you the problems that are in that system. I've worked for Walmart in the past, and you would think one of the largest retailers in the world would have their ducks in a row and everything would just work. A lot of problems that I found with that organization, and every organization I've worked for has had things that in my opinion, could be done better. And I think everybody finds those in systems that they work with or work for. They find things that they say, man, why do we do it this way? It could be so much better. And so legal system or the judicial system, no different. In a nation, the law can serve to maintain order, resolve disputes, and protect liberties and rights. That's really why we have laws and regulations, is to protect the rights of individuals. We want to make sure that companies, organizations, and other individuals are not doing things that cause harm, what we in legalese refer to as a tort, cause a harm to another individual or a legally actionable item. And so this is the construct by which the law exists in order to protect individuals, those liberties and those rights. And so let's talk about sources of law. So in the United States today, there are numerous sources of law. Main ones include the U.S. and state constitutions, common law, federal law, statutes and agency regulations, state and local law. Laws can conflict when you have state versus federal. There is this idea of supremacy, where if a state passes a law that is in conflict with the federal law overrides the state law. There's a lot of examples of this right now. I'm not going to get into some of these examples just because some of them are kind of hot button issues, but one of them is this example of marijuana regulations in some states or laws in some states versus the federal stance on this. So in certain states, they've passed laws that allow for medical and recreation use of marijuana. However, from a federal standpoint, from a DEA standpoint, these laws are criminal or go against the federal law. So what the government is essentially doing, or what the federal government is essentially doing, is saying, we don't want to make a decision on this because there's political consequences. So we're going to allow the states to do what they want and just kind of look the other way. And so that's why you see states that have dispensaries and things like that not to be rated by the feds or the DEA, because the DEA has every right to step in there and seize those assets, shut those stores down, and arrest the operators. From a federal law standpoint, state law says they have permission to do it. So this is a gray area right now in the United States on what's going to happen. And the way it looks is that the federal government is just going to kind of ignore this problem until it becomes so widespread enough. Then there will be enough consensus where political leaders can say, okay, we're going to change the laws, and there won't be political consequences because of that. So let's dive a little bit deeper in each one of these. The Constitution. the foundation for which a state or nation's, the foundation for a state or nation's laws. This is our sweeping documents that give us our main guidepost or foundation for which we base our law. The Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments, offers specific protection of individuals' liberty and justice, also empowers Congress to enact statutes. And so you've probably heard of some of these Bill of Rights, this idea of life, liberty, property, the idea of you have a right to speech, religion, that you can't be denied your property without due process. You have a right to appear before a court if you are arrested. When you are arrested, you have these Miranda rights read to you. You've probably all watched enough Law and Order to hear these kind of in your mind. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can and will be held against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, will be appointed to you. There's actually a legal case that involved a person named Miranda, and Miranda was arrested without his rights being told to him or known, and that set a precedent that, hey, we need to start communicating Miranda rights to people so they understand what their rights are. I teach law, business law, but I'm not a legal expert. I always defer to legal experts. If you do have specific questions, there are legal matters. I do have students sometimes email me with personal legal questions, and I don't offer that type of feedback. But I will say that it's pretty obvious as a citizen and as a teacher that if you are arrested for something, you should listen to what those Miranda rights are and take that to heart. If you feel like something improper is happening, you do have a right to remain silent and seek counsel. And so that is pretty smart in my book, that you want to get a third party, a representative, a lawyer, to give you feedback on what is going on and try to get to the bottom of it. So like I said, I don't offer legal advice, but the Miranda rights is something that every citizen should know about. And as a citizen, you should take that stuff to heart, in my opinion. And so moving along, the next thing are federal laws and statutes. The Constitution gives the power to enact statutes. Federal law preempts conflicting state and local laws, as I was just talking about with the marijuana legislation. This is not without limits, though, only if it's enacted within the powers granted to Congress in the Constitution. Areas where it preempts is aviation and railroads, for example, as family law is left to the states, and some law, such as antitrust, trademark, employment law, and others, coexist at state and federal level. So it's not, there are some, asterisks there that give states a little bit more leeway on some of these laws. Common law is really kind of the foundation for all law, consists of decisions by your courts, judicial decisions. U.S. law comes primarily from tradition of English common. We adopted our legal system from the English system, where prior decisions were used for current cases. Common body of law, an example is State versus Wayfair. That's also in your chapter. Regulations, these are basically laws passed by regulatory agencies. Think EPA, the ATF, thinking about the FCC, these different regulatory agencies that pass rules and regulations in order to protect the public. That's the main thing. Laws differ from regulations. Laws are passed by Congress. Regulations are standards and rules adopted by administrative agencies that govern how laws are enforced. And so even though, like a regulation law, there is some nuance, for all intents and purposes, there are legal requirements. Like if you are not doing what is you're regulated to do, you're going to have some legal consequences for that. So federal agencies are sometimes granted power by Congress, rule-making authority known as regulation. They carry normal force of law as long as they demonstrate responsible interpretation of relevant statutes. The example is the EPA for emissions and disposal regulations. The Administrative Procedures Act, or the APA, governs this process of developing and issuing federal regulations. All right, last thing we'll talk about are those continuing about these regulations. Oh, I've already talked about that. I'm sorry. And so, important business law and regulations. I'm going to pause the video or have you pause it right here and just read this. But if you have any questions about the reading or the chapter or the assignments, please shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk to you. Welcome to the class. Let's have a great semester together.